Voss, an opera by Richard Meale. Right now, it's time to hear Voss, the Creation of an Opera, a radio documentary produced by John Miller.
Music of Richard Meale, Viridian, played by the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Patrick Thomas. Viridian is one of Richard Meale's works which has a theatrical association. The Sydney Dance Company created a ballet using the music which Richard Meale wrote in 1979, and which, together with his String Quartet No. 2, marked the beginning of a new sense of direction in his work. Tonight we're bringing you a direct broadcast of his opera, Voss, which last weekend had its premiere performance by the Australian Opera, opening the 1986 Adelaide Festival. This long-awaited work is Richard Meale's first opera. It's based on Patrick White's novel, and the production has brought together some of the most formidably talented people currently working in Australian musical theatre and literature. In this feature, prior to our broadcast from the Festival Theatre in Adelaide, we hear from some of those people: Richard Meale himself, the poet and novelist David Malouf, who wrote the libretto, the two principal singers, Marilyn Richardson and Geoffrey Chard, the conductor Stuart Challender, and the producer Jim Sharman. First, here's Richard Meale with some of the work's history.
I'd always wanted to write an opera, and I'd had discussions for many years with the Australian Opera, but these mounted to nothing, although they'd offered commissions before, but I just couldn't sort of see my way musically, actually, to write an opera. But then, I think about 7 years ago, Peter Hemmings spoke to me again about the possibility of an opera, and at that time it was really something I felt I could tackle. So I said, well, he asked if I had any subject in mind. I didn't, and said, have you got any ideas? And he had been talking, I think, to Jim Sharman, and he suggested Voss. At first I couldn't see how one could reduce a book of that dimension into an operatic form. But then after David Malouf sent me a sketch of the libretto, I realised, yes, that something could be done. It was very quickly organised. Patrick gave his permission, and then David proceeded with the libretto, and I began work on it the day after I completed my second string quartet. I was so anxious to get on with it.
Did you envisage that it was going to take you so long
No.
to complete?
No, I didn't. I thought it would take a while, and but certainly not 5 years.
Because it has been a very long project, hasn't it?
Yes, well, of course, I had to rewrite so much of the first part of it, because by the time I'd got to the second act, I realised that I'd settled into it by then, and I realised I had to turn around and rewrite the first act completely.
Was that a radical way of rethinking for you, of reworking?
It was primarily simplification, removing unnecessary muddle, unnecessary material from it. But that is often a very difficult thing to do, to simplify a thing. I wanted to refine it as best I possibly could. And although certainly the last couple of years have really been involved in the orchestration and very much in simply physically copying the orchestral score, because stupidly I decided to copy it very, very neatly, almost as though it's printed. And of course that labour took far longer than I thought. At the same time, it worked out very well, because it meant I was able to put a lot of revision into it, to touch up bits here and there. I mean, some of the details I adjusted are infinitesimal, but I believe that cumulatively they're important.
Richard, how closely did you work with David Malouf over that period of writing the opera? Were there changes made from the from his initial libretto as you went along?
The only changes that were made were additional materials. I didn't know at the rate at which I'd use up the words, nor was he sure. It was only through doing it that I began to find that I was using the words up fairly quickly, mainly because I wanted a fairly naturalistic usage of words, particularly in the first act. So I was setting them at a reasonable pace rather than elongating phrases. So I wrote to David, who was in Italy at the time, saying, I need more words. So almost by return mail I received additional sections, which didn't turn out at all as padding, but in fact deepened the information about people. It really helped. And then he thought of a couple of other small points which he later sent me, and again these simply helped to illuminate the whole thing.
Richard Meale. David Malouf was born and educated in Brisbane. Since 1978 he's been a full-time writer, living part of each year in Italy. He spoke to me of his thoughts on writing the libretto of Voss.
I think that the central situation of Voss, the situation where Laura and Voss communicate across that great distance, which of course is something very daring and surprising and challenging in the novel, is actually essentially operatic in that music finds no difficulty about bringing two people together in its own dimension, irrespective of what space they're in. So I thought of that situation as being, as lending itself absolutely to opera. And, we know that once two people are singing together and their voices are mingling, they are together in spirit. Music wonderfully takes up and embodies spirit in that kind of way. And so I saw immediately that that was a possibility that made it in some ways easy to translate that difficult thing to the world of opera. And I simply went on from that. I simply decided that if that was going to happen there, one might as well radically transpose the whole of the novel into that kind of thing. And so I chose from the beginning to have everything happen in the same space at the same time on the stage, so that Sydney and the centre are one place on the stage all the time, and we can then have two separate lots of action going on simultaneously and being unified by the music.
Which duplicates really what happens in the novel itself, where there are many layers of action, many layers of meaning and imagery. And I thought when I first thought of the novel as being used as a libretto for an opera that it would be very difficult to translate that onto the stage.
Well, I mean, you just have to admit that you're now working in a different medium. And, being a writer, I do want to think always that books are utterly themselves and are untranslatable. That if you have a book, the experience of the book is that you sit down in your own individual body, your eye follows words on a page through sentences, and you make pictures in your head. And there is no way of reproducing that experience. Once you decide that what you're going to now have is something like the same material, with people sitting in a community, in a theatre, watching real people do something on a stage, you are in a medium so different from that of a book that I'm then willing to accept all the changes that have to be made and all the things that have to be lost and gained.
Were there many things that had to be lost?
Yes, because, that is a novel where the plot is very intricate, where there are a great many characters, and a lot of the characters that I felt had to be left out to make a workable opera with a small number of characters involved. A lot of the characters I left out were the ones I like best in the book, in fact. I'm very, very fond myself of of two of those people who are on the expedition and the relationship between them as it's explored in the book, and that's Turner and Angus. those two have that's a most wonderful part of the book. And
Turner is
Turner is the
ex-convict,
ex-convict, and Angus is that young squatter who has quite high opinion of himself and has to discover, in fact, that his real soulmate and mirror is in fact Turner, and that's a wonderful thing in the novel. That had to go. I mean, I I couldn't introduce those two characters among the others. Willie Pringle is the most interesting character, and some of Willie Pringle's dialogue and perceptions survive in the opera, but in other people's mouths. And yes, I mean, it was all the richness of characters had to go. And then again, you know, one wants to say that what is essential to a Patrick White novel is its language. And its language is not the kind of language you can use with that kind of density in a libretto. A libretto has to have a really quite simplified language. It has to have quite simple sentence structure if the words are to be heard. It has to have a kind of number of repetitions that the novelist certainly wouldn't be happy with. And it has to choose a small number of images which get repeated but which have a kind of cumulative effect. And so in every way the language of the libretto is nothing like the language of a novel. But then you are reducing 200,000 words to 4, 5, 6, whatever it is.
Yes, it's really a very, very much a distillation of the novel.
Yes, and what you're then expecting, of course, is that, I mean, changing the metaphor, you're reducing the novel to a kind of skeleton and hoping that the music is going to then put different flesh back on it, that it will come out again as a work of great solidity and density. But what the flesh will consist of this time is music, whereas before it was language.
Patrick White, did you have some conversations with him about the libretto?
No, I didn't. Long before the question of a libretto of Voss had ever come up, I was at the time writing opera crits for the National Times, and he did say to me that he'd been approached by someone about a possible Voss opera, except it was not really to be an opera, it was to be a kind of theatre piece for just two voices, for Voss and Laura, and he was not happy about that. And he said to me, just in a kind of asking my opinion, he said, you know, I'm not wrong in thinking that if Voss were to be an opera, it could be a kind of grand opera. And I said, no, I think it certainly could be a grand opera if it was to be an opera. So, I mean, that was several years before that came up. And then I guess it was in a conversation maybe between Patrick White and Peter Hemmings that my name first came up as a possible librettist. And I don't know whether it was Patrick White who suggested that. I just don't know that. But certainly he approved of my doing the libretto. And when I had done it, I did show him a copy of the libretto as it was at that stage. It was a fairly provisional first draft of the two acts, and he was not he didn't say, no, this is impossible, that's all.
David, you've already embarked on another libretto, another collaboration with Richard Meale, this time on a libretto of your own. Is there a difference in adapting from somebody else's work and writing an entirely original work?
Yes, I suppose the great safety in doing the Voss thing was that one had a great book behind one. I mean, you knew what the quality of that was, and that as long as you didn't travesty its power, that the power was there, and the great situation was there, and the great characters were there. That was a great safety. Of course, it was also very intimidating. I did certainly feel when I was writing that I ought to, as far as possible, try and find words that appeared in the novel. And certainly in the first act, I think the second act is a little freer. I did feel a little freer, but certainly in the first act, I felt a bit like those people who were hired to write the film of Gone with the Wind, who were told that they could use any words they liked, but they had to appear in that order in the novel. And I didn't quite do that, but certainly I felt that one of the ways of trying to reproduce something like the language quality of the book was to stick, if possible, to two phrases that appeared in the book, even if you transpose them from one character to another. And so there was both that sense of assurance about the greatness being there in the book, and a certain kind of timidity, certainly as it was when I first began, about doing something entirely of my own. I think by the time I was finished with Voss, when I read it now after a long time, it does seem very much like a work of my own. I mean, I see qualities of myself in it as well as of Patrick White.
David Malouf, who wrote the libretto for Voss. Musically, the opera contrasts the landscape of the epic and tragic expedition and the intimate journey of the human souls involved with the social world of a young provincial society. Richard Meale, to depict the Sydney social scene of the 1840s, has utilised original music from the period, the Australian quadrilles by William Ellard, here played by Kathleen Brady. Richard Meale talks now about the way he approached writing the music for Voss.
What I've done is I've used the experience that I've had as I have developed as a person since I first fell in love with music as a child. What I did was simply open up the doors of that experience and just bring it forth, rather than to take any stylistic ploy about it. I believed that the drama itself was the most important thing, that to create the reality of it, that is, as an operatic reality, was the most important thing, and that should determine the nature of the music. It was my job to ransack my brain to find the best way to express what was required from time to time in it.
This was your first opera. Was it in fact your first vocal work? Had you written for the voice before?
I'd written for the voice before, but mainly I'd say probably before I'd be about 25. I don't think I've written for voice since then.
Yes. I'm wondering if you found any problems with dealing with voice.
No. I enjoyed it. It came, I think, very easily in that sense. It was because I did not apply an instrumental style to it that I just let my own sort of vocal intuition, I suppose, operate.
Yes. Did you have any singers in mind? Marilyn Richardson's been associated with the opera since she sang the garden scene.
That's right.
In Adelaide for the 1980 festival. Was she someone that perhaps was in your mind as an ideal Laura?
Not whilst I was writing it, although she was at the back of my mind all the time. I must say that, because I'd worked with Marilyn since years and years ago, had performed works by Messiaen, etc., with her. So she was at the back of my mind, but, I didn't sort of construct it around her voice. But it certainly does suit her voice remarkably well.
I think a lot of people will be very taken aback, let's say, and then perhaps relieved, secondly, at the huge amount of lyricism in the score. And I personally love it.
Yes. Well, that was one of the comments, of course, that was made when you sang the garden scene at a couple of festivals
that's
ago.
Right.
That
that is one of the most lyrical sections of the whole opera, but there are certainly others.
Geoffrey, for you, is that the same sort of experience?
Oh, yes, indeed. I've had my share of contemporary operas to cope with. We all go down the mine at some time. And this is an agreeable surprise because there is beautiful, sumptuous music to be sung. And not only the wonderful scene that Marilyn referred to, but there's a reprise of that tune in the second act and two further wonderful duets. And Marilyn has a lovely aria, of course that's in the garden scene. But it's...
well, so do you.
Yes, my aria is,
song,
I have
yes.
I have a German song, a German song. I have to have a German accent, you know. But it's, it's a wonderful piece, and one of the good things about it, I think, is that the scenes are rather well constructed. They're short and tight, and it retains the interest from one moment to the next, and I think that's always very good in contemporary works.
Yes.
Sometimes they get
It's
a little
certainly
bit
not
musical
long-winded.
diarrhea, you know. No, it's very well constructed.
What about the characters themselves? Have they been difficult for you to come to terms with, Marilyn? Laura?
Well, I found that I've had to get on the same wavelength as the director, which is important, and see it through his eyes. And I think his clear-cut way of treating the symbolic nature of the story is excellent. I know it has been proven before in his production of Patrick White's plays. I haven't done an opera, I don't think, in quite this manner. One is left a little wondering how much one should put into the very personal side, a more intimate side of the characters themselves, rather than just as symbols or figures. But we rely on him to tell us when we go too far or not far enough. So I'm appreciating his direction. The character of Laura herself I find good because she is an individual and appears so in the opera, indeed contrasted to the rest of the society ladies who are all busy conforming. She remains firmly individual.
Yes, she's
so I rather like that.
Yeah, they're both rebels, really,
yes,
aren't they?
Yes.
That's what attracts them to each other, I
Yes.
suppose. I was very interested to receive a copy from Patrick White of the Voss book on a run-through he did when he inscribed in the flyleaf, "To my most hated character," for me. And I thought, that's nice. He said, "I'm sure you'll do it well," and I'm sure that was a backhanded compliment. But I do see what he means. He's a Teutonic character, Voss, and that must be the aspect that alienated Patrick White from him, and the German qualities. But then, of course, the poor fellow is he's a victim of his time, the sort of provincial upbringing that he had,
Yes.
and I think he's conforming in a kind of way, and he's trying to break that mould by getting away and going out and facing the...
But you know, I think he also represents one of that breed that has come always from another country, it doesn't matter which one, to Australia and done great things.
Yes. Yes,
Right up to
it's
Alan Bond.
a way of rising out of being ordinary and lifting themselves out of the pool.
Yes.
He says in the thing, rather in our libretto, I put my foot on my father's face and left my mother weeping beside the stove. So really the umbilical situation was there, and he just wanted to get away from that small town.
Yes.
And he's, they call him a scarecrow, and he's German. This is something that people hate.
It's foreignness,
Yes.
I think, yes.
I think everybody...
And also, I think Australia is Voss's challenge, personal
Yes.
challenge, and Voss becomes Laura's personal challenge. So it's rather interesting, I think.
But they're both such people of high integrity and quality. I think that's what attracts them to each other. And it really is... I read the book many, many years ago when I was young, and I reread it recently. And I think it's a fantastic work. And I just hope that, we all hope that the opera will receive the regard that it ought to have.
Marilyn Richardson and Geoffrey Chard, and their impressions and reactions to Voss. Geoffrey Child is singing the title role, and Marilyn Richardson that of Laura Trevelyan. And a little later this evening, we're bringing you a direct broadcast from the Adelaide Festival of the Australian Opera's production of Voss by Richard Meale. The conductor of this world premiere is Stuart Challender, and in the week running up to the opening last weekend, I spoke with him about the work.
Well, it's not what people think of as modern music. I mean, it is a very modern opera in terms of its conception and how it will be done on stage, and indeed the music too has a freshness about it that makes it entirely contemporary. But it is, in the main, quite a tonal score. In fact, Richard was quite adamant in his concept of the character of Laura that there could only be tonal music could only express this very forthright and honest character, and the dissonance of the work refers to the other character, of course, Voss, and his demise in the desert. But nevertheless, I think that the normal opera-going and indeed concert-going public will find this work extremely accessible from the musical point of view, and extremely dramatic and exciting from the theatrical point of view.
There'll be a large cast of soloists. What about the chorus as well?
There is a chorus as well, yes, of the sort of social world of Sydney of 1845. That's about 20-odd people. Mm-hmm. And there is a small children's chorus also that appear in the final scene.
Yes. And how many in the orchestra? Is it a large?
Oh yes, full-size symphony
orchestra.
Yes, we'll have about 70 here in Adelaide.
Yes. You've been working for some weeks or months even, I suppose, now with the singers, the soloists, but you've only just come to face-to-face with the orchestra, as it were. How have they been reacting to it? How have they reacted to the music?
Well, they have been absolutely marvellous. I think that anybody, any musician, and indeed I think anybody that comes in contact with the score can only be excited by it. It has something right from the very first bar, which would lift the roof off, that is just extraordinary. I mean, he has captured this world of Voss, and the feeling of the landscape in a way that is entirely new, I think, in this country. I mean, there have been quite successful attempts before within the confines set by somebody like Sculthorpe, and it's been very successful with his sun music and so on. But this is quite a different approach, and there is something about the music that suggests a remoteness and a stillness, and yet a depth, a spiritual depth that is quite extraordinary.
Has it meant a great deal to you to be involved with this, the first production of a very large and very important Australian opera?
Yes, I think it's probably the most exciting thing that I've done ever, probably. Great responsibility.
What do you see as the future for Voss?
Well, I don't want to make any predictions about its success with the public. We all hope, of course, that it will have that sort of popular success that will ensure that it remains in the repertoire for a number of years. There are about 20 performances scheduled during the coming 12 months in Adelaide, Sydney and Melbourne. The future of the opera after that remains to be seen. There are also hopes that it will receive other productions elsewhere, and even perhaps overseas.
One of the most important persons involved in this production of Voss has been the director, Jim Sharman, whom Patrick Veitch, the general manager of the Australian Opera, referred to as being not only its director, but its marriage broker and midwife, bringing together this remarkable group of collaborators and who gently nursed the work through its developmental stages.
My involvement with Voss began with Peter Hemmings's notion of Richard Meale creating an opera, and the subject would be Voss, and his intention was to involve not only the composer and the librettist, but also a director, somebody who would see it through to its stage production from the outset.
Can I ask you, Jim, how you've actually confronted the opera and how you've developed the production from those days, for those very early days?
The production found its form really over the course of the last year. I mean, one could fill in elements from the past, but they're really quite slight in comparison to the knowledge that the production had been scheduled for the Adelaide Festival and subsequently in Sydney and Melbourne, and that my contact with Moffat Oxenbould at the Australian Opera, that the production was going ahead, and the engagement of the production team of Brian Thompson as set designer, Luciano Righi costumes, Chrissy Colty as the choreographer, Nigel Levings as the lighting designer, and of course the key collaborator Stuart Challender as the conductor. And my first working period on the opera was related to the realisation of it visually with the designers Brian Thompson and Luciano Righi. I mentioned the costumes first because it's perhaps simpler that the costumes were to create the sort of human aspects of each of the characters, and we were very anxious not to turn it into a sort of period costume drama, but to give it a sort of reality that, or an edge, one might say, and certain ideas such as the chorus in the early part of the opera being in very dark clothes that seemed to be quite unsuitable for the climate, and much more related to a sort of English Victorian notion, and that when the chorus return at the end, they're much lighter, and there is a distinction in what has happened in the 20 years there. Many elements, that's just one example of the sort of exploration with the costumes. With the set, of course, one was looking for the formal way of expressing the opera on stage, and there are many ideas involved there, and I think that people who were hearing the opera, of course, don't have the luxury of seeing this, but probably will when they have the opportunity to see it in the theatre. Of course, also, I think with the premiere of an opera, I was very conscious of the fact that people are hearing the score, listening for the libretto, and watching the stage all at the same time. They're getting an enormous amount at one time, and the fact that the opera's been received so well, I think, is marvellous. But I do think that when people have further opportunities to see it, the subtlety of it, there'll be more for them to see into it. But there were certain ideas from the very beginning, a sense of ceremony, a sense of, I think I've referred to it as a ceremony of love and suffering, and I think that there's an element of the ceremony in the sort of circle that is in the middle of the stage and that is used in different ways in different scenes. And the idea that the interior and exterior worlds of the opera would coexist, and that we would travel on a journey really with Voss and Laura, almost as if in a sort of waking dream, the society, the desert, the different worlds that are there in the score would come and go behind them as we followed this central relationship through the opera. Also, the idea that within the score there are constantly musical phrases that recur and are transformed in different ways from scene to scene. Also, there are lines that are uttered by a character in scene one that may come up later on in the opera in the mouth of another character in another different situation. And in the same way, we wanted the sort of furniture of the Bonner's house to become the rocks, the furniture of the desert, that there were these sort of correlations, that a cloth that appeared in one scene then turned up as a sheet that was being stitched in another, that a shawl that Rose offers Laura in the garden and is finally turned into the child of Rose that becomes Mercy at the end of the opera. I mean, it's these sort of cross-references, this sort of cross-hatching, to try and build up a very subtle portrait to express the inner lives of it, because I think that Voss is a very internal work, even musically. I think despite its many thrilling moments, particularly orchestrally in the second act, it's finally isn't about the externals of the characters or the externals of explorers or exploration. It is finally a psychological journey. And that was visually one tried to do that, and also with a very detailed approach with the singers to working on a very specific understanding of each line that they're singing. So they would have that the opera would finally be offered to the audience with the sort of authority of that understanding.
You've worked on other opera productions, and most notably, of course, was Death in Venice a couple of festivals ago. Do you see any parallels between Death in Venice and Voss?
Well, they're both literary adaptations, which is I suppose, an obvious one. And in terms of the physical production, there are certain stylistic elements that come from a collaboration of Brian Thompson, Luciano Righi, and myself that I think travel through those, and also back to other things. Patrick White play A Cheery Soul was perhaps the first time that when working with Brian we actually swept the stage clear and really put the focus on the artist. And now the kind of theatre that I'm interested in, be it opera or drama, is one where one makes the most direct connection between the artist and the audience, and the sort of images that occurs within on the stage are not literal ones. They're ones that actually suggest things to the audience, that play on the audience's imagination, and with a specific notion that if something is there in the score, to give them the space to actually hear that in the theatre and fill in something for themselves, so that the audience is not a sort of passive participant, but an active one.
There have been criticisms of productions that have been mounted here in Adelaide at the Festival Theatre, specifically thinking of Death in Venice and the Macropolis Affair, that the size of them was in fact too big for them to travel anywhere else. Now, has this been a problem with Voss? Because you've had to bear in mind that it is in fact going to be mounted in Sydney and in Melbourne.
Yes, no, the production we knew from the outset was to be able to play the Sydney Opera House, the Melbourne Centre, and here in Adelaide. And so, in fact, we, rather than doing what had previously been the case, which is designing it for the larger space and then trying to think of ways of diminishing it, we actually began designing it for the Sydney Opera House and then expanded it for this theatre, and it'll be in a similar structure when it's performed in Melbourne. And that seems to have solved that problem. The structure of the opera is in three parts. The journey has three stages, as it were. There's which is almost a sort of Shakespearean structure, whereby you begin in the society, and then there is the central characters that undergo a trial by nature, and then it returns to the society, and you see what effect that journey has had. And in that essence, it deals with nature, and it deals also with the spirit of the people. And one element, of course, that listeners will unfortunately not be able to experience is that of the two Aboriginal guides who are on the journey. They're danced roles, but have an enormous presence in the theatre because they are directly related to the landscape, which they seem to understand far better than the explorers and their German commander, and they locate all the landscapes on the stage. And finally, there is a sense of them trying to put together these two broken fragments of Laura and Voss to try and aid the sort of humanity of Voss, and finally also to have this relationship with Laura Trevelyan's nature when Voss has to be taught his final lesson.
Jim Sharman, the director of Voss. In this feature programme about the opera, we've heard from, as well as Jim Sharman, the conductor Stuart Challender, the two principal singers, Marilyn Richardson and Geoffrey Chard, the librettist, David Malouf, and the composer, Richard Meale. I'm John Miller, and on ABC-FM now we're taking you across to the Festival Theatre in Adelaide for a direct broadcast of this production of Voss by the Australian Opera. To introduce the broadcast, here's John West.